very, I think, are complement each other.
Good, okay. Yeah. Well, good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Nicole Osmondson, and I am currently serving as president of the Edison Middle School PTO. And for those of you that were here last week, this is the second session of our parent education series. Last week, we covered drug and alcohol use within or with our children and how to parent through those issues. That will be available on YouTube and video, and we'll get some information out as far as where that will be on the district website. Tonight, we're going to cover social media. And again, we will be video and recording this, and this will also be available. So for those of you who have friends that weren't able to attend, both sessions are incredibly important and applicable to what we're doing as parenting today. So I'd encourage you to take the time to either go back and watch it again or share that information so that other parents have that opportunity to see it also. So again, tonight the format will be the first hour or so, our panel of highly respected individuals in our community with a lot of expertise will be educating you in areas that they feel is very pertinent and important to the issues of social media. During that time, you can write down questions. You should have been handed a piece of paper when you walked in. If not, we can get you another piece of paper. And the second part of the session will take, about a 3 or 4 minute intermission when you can turn those questions in, hand them to us. Then we will start again for the second part of our series, and that'll be question and answer time. So you can have an opportunity to ask specific questions that are related to what they're speaking of tonight. So I would like to introduce our panel tonight. Let's start with Detective Jason Holbeck. Detective Holbeck graduated from Parker High School and later graduated from South Dakota State University. He began his career in law enforcement at the Sioux Falls Police Department in 2006. In 2008, he joined the Street Crimes Unit, which focused on gang activity, and served in that unit until 2011. In 2015, he joined the Investigative Services Division in the Crimes Against Persons section with an investigative focus on internet crimes against children. He is a trained forensic examiner. We're also honored to have Candy Van Dam with us. As a founding partner at Insight Marketing Design, Candy Van Dam provides concepts and marketing strategies for clients ranging from one-person startups to multinational companies. She began her career in public relations for a large hospital in Minneapolis. After returning to Sioux Falls, she worked in local television, writing and producing television commercials, long-form videos, and promotional spots. She and her partner, Doug Moss, opened Insight Marketing Design in 2003. The agency employs 12 marketing professionals, including writers, designers, programmers, and broadcast producers, and works with clients in financial, healthcare, education, biofuel, and professional service industries. As a community volunteer, Candy serves on the Chamber of Commerce committees, nonprofit boards, and spent more than a dozen years as a PTA leader in local and state organizations. Candy and her husband have 2 adult sons and 5 grandchildren. And then again tonight we have the privilege of having John Haig with us. John Haig is a master's level national certified counselor and licensed professional counselor. He received his undergraduate degree from St. Olaf College and graduate degree from the University of South Dakota. John has been involved in teaching and counseling in schools in various locations, including Germany, Sweden, Iceland, and Minnesota, before returning to South Dakota to accept the position of a 28-year journey as a professional school counselor at Edison Middle School. His passion has been centered around researching and understanding adolescent behavior and parenting of adolescents. He has facilitated parenting education sessions in various locations for the last 20 years. During his retirement, John has been teaching at the University of South Dakota and Augustana University. So I would like us to please give a round of applause for our panel tonight. And this is all volunteer time on their part, so I'm very thankful that they're up here to educate us. So we're going to have Detective Holbeck come up first and speak.
Hello? I guess I'm just gonna start it off right now. Bio was a pretty short synopsis of my life, but to let you guys know why I got into this aspect of the police department, because there's many different things you can do at the police department. We see a lot of bad things happen to a lot of people. Is it better now? Okay. We see a lot of bad things happen to a lot of people, but what I've definitely seen is that those with very little recourse as far as what happens are kids, and especially when it comes to crimes that are sexual in nature. I feel very strongly about that. So these type of investigations, especially as you've seen recently, end up taking a long time, but we find that the reward is so great because they definitely do impact kids in the best way. This first slide kind of starts out what I'm talking about. Kids are perfect victims when it comes to internet crimes. They often lack the physical and emotional development that we would have. And you're gonna have to, excuse me, I'm gonna be running through these slides very quickly. So, and they're taught to trust adults. But not all predators are pretending to be children. Oftentimes what we see is what we would think a person who's attempting to contact these children, what we would think would be the least likely scenario is oftentimes what's employed. They oftentimes present themselves as adults, and they oftentimes try to make contact with these children just based off of finding what it is that child is lacking at that time, what that emotional need is at that time. As I stated, they desire attention and affection. If they're not getting it at home, they will get it elsewhere, and that's a lot of times what we see with these young kids. I think oftentimes too, what makes our jobs harder is they're not viewed as credible witnesses. Now, that is kind of an odd statement there. It's not that we don't view the children as credible witnesses, and we could probably even change a language in that. It's that they're difficult witnesses when it comes time for actual prosecution. It's difficult to have a child express themselves on the stand. So it often makes them a little bit better victim from the suspect standpoint. And then the lack of recall and verbal skills. Any interview we do with young children, we end up not getting nearly the information that we would normally get with an adult because they just simply don't remember that much. I have 3 little ones of my own, all of them in preschool at this time, and I don't think that they've ever once remembered what they've done at school any single day. So you can just imagine if you're asking them what happened over the course of the last 10 months, what are they going to tell you? I don't know. This kind of covers, we see a change in these predators because of technology, and that's what we're here to talk about. Most recently, social media is the conduit for a lot of this type of activity. You can see it used to be the whole scenario of puppy dogs and candy bars, the creepy van. It's now anonymous texts and introducing them to pornography early in an attempt to groom them. We used to see folks that would lurk around areas like this, parks, malls, whatnot. They don't have to leave their house any longer because they have access to children through online means. Child pornography used to be something that couldn't be traded easily, and if it did, it was either in person or through the mail, because we're talking about hard copies. Now there's a camera in every single one of, well, I shouldn't say every single one, but most of the pockets of many of the children that I speak with anyway, especially starting at middle school and up. And I don't think that it's in this presentation, but I always like to share this stat because I think it's really important. And it's an old stat. I don't have the updated one. It's from 2010, but it is estimated that 1 in 5 pornographic images found in the hands of online predators were produced by the child themselves. In the past, they were considered lonely and hunted. Now they are easy to honestly interact and share with other pedophiles, and we see that oftentimes with peer-to-peer file sharing. And now they're especially masked because they're operating in that cyber world. Oftentimes what I tell kids when I give presentations to children, and that's most of the times I'm giving presentations to children more than anybody else, but we always try to explain that imagine the camera or the tablet or that computer screen is a window to your bedroom and there are no drapes and you can never shut it because it's essentially what they are. And there are people on the other side that you just simply cannot see. So oftentimes that rings home when we're chatting with kids, but it applies to that statement. All these people have to do is exist in this cyber world, this fictitious reality, and they can have access to these kids. Or whether or not you're familiar with the concept of grooming, but we discussed it before. They're looking for children with a specific bio. Oftentimes it's people with self-image issues. And none of this is gender specific, but usually you're going to see men approaching young females. So, and oftentimes these young females do have serious issues with self-image. When I'm going through devices in the process of investigating a case, it's not uncommon that I will see copies of suicide notes or copies of letters that they've written that discuss how they view themselves in a negative way, pictures of them cutting, things like that. Oftentimes we'll see young ladies, and again, it's not gender specific, we'll see this happen to young boys too, but they have self-image issues. They're very methodical in manipulations and reinforce shame-based behavior in the child, and that is very common too, where it gets to the point where in order to get young children to share images with them, they will use a tactic of shaming. They will do everything possible, but oftentimes all it takes is just a little bit of shame and making that child feel terrible for not sending the images, and before you know it, there is a free flow of sharing of those images. They'll use those techniques to lower the inhibitions, to exploit these children. Sometimes they will send and offer gifts to allure, although I don't see that as much as I think some of my predecessors do. I think they've kind of refined their tactics to avoid a lot of physical contact until, of course, they're actually going to arrange for a first-time meeting, and that oftentimes is going to result in something bad. We've stated before, they're filling emotional needs that these children aren't already getting. And in doing so, then they get what they want. I went back, didn't I? And I'm not going to keep reading through all this stuff too, because I think we're limited for time, but ultimately when it comes down to it with these folks, when I run into my victims and we finally get to the point where this investigation starts because somebody has been made aware of it and they call us, I will find that my interviews with my victims are oftentimes longer than they are with my suspects. I will find I will get more cooperation from my suspects than I will from my victims. My victims will adamantly protect my suspects regardless of the situation, because this grooming process and the constant bombardment with this shame and with this guilt has essentially set them up to where they don't want to cooperate with me at all. So I see that a lot of times. We stated before, introduction to pornography is common. That is definitely something to be concerned with, even if children aren't communicating with anybody of this sort. But they will introduce them to pornography, and it's an attempt to soften this as those requests start to come in for pornographic images of themselves. It prepares them to become comfortable with such a thing as pornography. Social media, though, is definitely the major conduit that we are seeing when it comes to pedophiles attempting to make contact with children online. And typically because it is so easy to do, and most children are engaged in some form of social media. For the longest time, it was chat rooms back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Yahoo Chat specifically, MSN Messenger. But those have, especially where the young kids have gone by the wayside, and we'll see social media is being used in order to communicate with their friends. It's these same apps that these individuals are using to try to prey on these children. Kenny's going to give us a lot more examples of this, but some of the major ones that I'm seeing, first and foremost, above any and all, is Snapchat. That is the social media application of choice of kids, and therefore it's going to be the one that many of these individuals are going to use to try to communicate with children. We'll also see it through Instagram, Uvu. I've had multiple cases with them. Facebook, I think, is becoming a thing of the past. As the more I talk to classes, each time I hit that next year's second grade class, the hands are fewer and fewer as far as which one of them use Facebook. So they go so far as to scream at me in auditoriums, "That's for old people." So Snapchat is what they are using, though, and there's no doubt that that is my most common. Omegle is another example of this, and we've had Kik cases too. Kik is a company out of Canada. It's a chat application, but as it states there, new apps are created every day, and about the time that these children are figuring out what applications they like and choose to use in order to communicate, it's the same time that the individuals who are attempting to exploit them are discovering these apps. Yeah. It's a lot of it, I mean, a lot of it's the same thing. It's just an attempt to find that, whatever void it is, whatever emotional need they have, and then fill whatever need that is. Gotcha. I'm guessing the other presenters are going to be able to cover a lot of those too, and then we'll hit that in the Q&A. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. So we'll see the communication initiate on these type of social media sites, such as Facebook or Instagram. They'll find some of these even more general sites to initiate contact on, and then move them to different types of communication applications, such as Snapchat, Kik, or Text Now apps. And we've seen plenty of cases with texting applications like Text Now, because oftentimes they also hold the ability to make phone calls through that application, all through Wi-Fi and without any knowledge to any parent that would be providing some type of cellular service. Wi-Fi connectivity is key when it comes to children communicating with anybody, because oftentimes you don't see a lot of parents are willing to fork over hundreds of dollars a month that would cover all of that data typically. But through this communication, that relationship is cultivated, and through that grooming process, eventually the comfortability level increases, and then images are shared. So a lot of the things that I investigate don't necessarily involve actual communication with children and adults, and sometimes it involves sexting between juveniles and juveniles, but I also deal with just simply these predators and the production, distribution, or manufacturing of images with other people like them. But sexting is definitely one of those cases that comes up often. More and more, the more access that children have to these phones. They will share images with people that they are engaged in with online relationships, which are seemingly becoming more common than actual relationships. And sometimes they can be sending these to a predator, believing that this person is actually somebody of their age. That is a common tactic that they use as well, is they will use stock photos they find online and post those into a page as if it's them attempting to catfish them. That's one of the terms that's used. And some of the problems with sexting, even if it is between two juveniles, is that it almost always gets shared with about 20 other people in their school, and then it becomes this giant fiasco, much of which is not anything that we can handle or we can properly deal with, because the system that we work in only does so much when it comes to addressing these issues. But do remember that even though they oftentimes are falling victim, to these certain situations, it is still illegal for them to send those images of themselves and even to possess images of themselves in such a way. Illegal, yes. We see cases originate with online gaming. These are typically more along my 8 to 12-year-olds that aren't going to have devices like phones or tablets or access to as much of the social media, but they'll play things like Call of Duty and different other games and different gaming systems. We'll find that these predators will play those games with them, posing as a child, and eventually they will move over to other means of communication, Snapchat, Kik, some of the other things that we mentioned earlier. Sometimes these systems allow for photos to be shared within that system, so we will see child porn get sent or received through gaming systems as well. But that makes it very difficult for investigators like me because the proprietary software on these devices does not allow for me to conduct forensic examinations like I would any other type of device. And oftentimes that evidence is lost unless we're able to actually photograph it with a digital camera. That's just how crude we have to get in order to capture that evidence. So I'm sure these guys know that, and I'm sure that's why they try to stick with that. Again, if the kids like it, if it's popular with the kids, these predators are going to use it. So what happens with these images that are sent? Damage is done, the predator has the images of the child. Oftentimes they'll be reformatted and added to torrents for file sharing, otherwise known as peer-to-peer. If you did any type of music downloads in the last couple decades, Napster, LimeWire, stuff like that, that's essentially what peer-to-peer file sharing is. Sometimes people have done movies and music through torrent files as well. It's the exact same thing. It's free software, it's easy to use. It's just that these type of images are being traded through those systems from one pedophile or predator to the other. We are seeing a resurgence in chat room sites, and we are seeing them oftentimes drop links in those chat room sites to things like Dropbox or OneDrive or stuff like that in order to allow for other people to have access to their cache of files as well. So it's another way that these images are distributed and shared. And they're definitely part of a larger online community. It is a network between these folks, and they keep in close contact because the amount of images out there is surprisingly low, a lot lower than you would think, and so anything new, they're very excited to share with one another. Another issue that we see with the images that are sent out, the images have been sent, we can't control that any longer, is shaming. We see the crude term for this is slut shaming, and we will see pictures of young ladies, most times it's young ladies, posted to sites. The sites originate in a foreign country that we have no jurisdiction over, therefore we can't get them to take it down. Even if you make contact with these companies, they oftentimes won't take it down, and they'll go so far as to dox them by placing home addresses, images of families, business addresses for parents and stuff like that. So I've had instances where young ladies have called me and given me a link. I go to the link and I see that it's child pornography, and I ask, what is this? That's me when I was 14, and the person's 25 when they're talking to me. So it's hard to get this stuff to go away. Once it's sent, it is no longer in anybody's control other than whoever receives it. As far as safety goes and helping protect the kids, you need to get involved and almost hovering over them at every moment when it comes for them to use for them to use their devices, because honestly, it's incredible how oftentimes we see parents that have absolute 100% trust in their kids, and then by the time we get involved, that damage is so severe, it's almost impossible to control. So we really need to keep tabs on these young ones when it comes to use of their devices, and Candy's going to go over that a little bit more. Neither software, organizations like police departments or any type of organization can replace mom and dad is running the show when it comes to this. So oftentimes we're clueless as far as what some of these newer apps are, because oftentimes adults aren't using these type of apps. They don't find it necessary. So you need to get to know, you need to get back down to that level and know what type of services, what applications. And if you don't know how to use them, ask your child to help you understand how to use them. But if if they've got an app on your phone and you don't know how to get into it, find out how to get into it, because you're going to need to be able to see what it is that they have. And then educate yourself. This is a good start, coming to places like this that offer these type of seminars, but, read. Google search is often, you're going to find what you need to find, but really stay on top of it when it comes to that. And then establish rules for internet use, and Candy's definitely going to talk about that too. Again, we discussed this at the beginning. Children are naive. They make good victims. They need to understand that what they're seeing online isn't necessarily true. So there definitely needs to be a very good conversation about what reality is, and teach them how to be skeptical of what information they find online. And again, monitor, monitor, monitor is the best defense when it comes to this. Another example is to make computing a family activity. This isn't always realistic, but it's definitely a goal to shoot for anyway. But it essentially refers to as just having these discussions with your kids and even working with these apps online with them. Make sure that it is ingrained in them that anytime anything threatening or inappropriate comes their way, to report it to you, to a school counselor, to a school resource officer, or the police, if it does come to them. Because the sooner we can get in front of it, usually the better the turnout is. Know the passwords to each and every account, and don't ever allow your kids to have full control over any device. These are the famous last words. I hear it every time I talk to parents in cases. My son or daughter, he would never do something like that. I won't go through all these too. We'll make this slide, or these slides, available for you folks, but here's some tips when it comes to keeping the kids safe. This wasn't supposed to stay in there, but he's one of our suspects years back. Candy's going to cover parental control apps too, but again, Google is your friend. You will find a lot of responses. You will have to do some research as far as what types of applications, control apps will be something that you feel is something you can utilize, but there are a lot of options out there. The best defense I've seen so far, and it doesn't mean that it's going to stop everything, are applications that show all text activity, even to the point where everything the child does on the phone is mirrored and sent back to the parent's phone. Oftentimes we don't see that employed until these young ones have already got themselves in deep and the trust is gone, but it definitely keeps them honest. But I have had a recent case even where that hasn't even been enough, and finally, after about, it was 3 months of grooming, and it was a peer, so it wasn't as horrific, but after about 3 months of grooming from the suspect out in New York, finally knowing full well that father was going to see the images and the messages, here they come. That's the power that these folks have over some of these young kids. The note there, these apps are only effective if you have control over your child's device. I run into a lot of issues when it comes to parents who are reporting something like this to me, where they don't want to deprive their child of the device, the same device that they've used to get themselves in all this trouble. Oftentimes it's because they don't think they'll be able to call 911 if they need to. They're not going to be able to call grandma if they need to. They won't be able to call mom and dad at their office if they need to. I really would just challenge you to think back to your childhood and realize that you're all sitting here breathing air without the use of these phones during your childhood. And I did too. It wasn't until 19 until I got my big brick phone. So here we are, alive. It's amazing. It's good to let those kids disconnect. And there are other alternatives when it comes to and kids have the ability to communicate. There's things, they don't have to have the iPhone 7 in order to communicate or to call 911. There are other options. So just consider that, especially if you've got some trust issues. If they cannot make good choices with a phone, are they better off without it? I'm biased, but yes, because like I said, this stuff is so hard to undo. Here are some online resources. Candy will have more. I'll just leave that up there for a little bit. And again, I apologize for running through stuff. We want to get a chance for everybody. I keep hitting buttons. I want to give a chance for everybody to talk, and, well, we'll be able to cover a lot during the Q&A, but that was a very quick baptism by fire as far as online investigations go. Thank you.
And I want, from beginning. All right. Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Thank you for inviting me tonight. Very excited to be here. Sometimes there are just coincidences that you can't ignore, and today I was surfing the internet and I found this video, and hopefully this will play. It's a sponsored video. It's from Nature Valley, I think. And I thought, perfect.
When you were a kid, what did you do for fun?
So we'd go blueberry picking, for instance. That's so cute. But it was true.
We grew watermelons, plantains.
I found an old sign which was big enough for me to sit on. It made a great toboggan. It was very slick and very fast.
I had a few fish in my basket, and I looked up on this bluff, and here's this black bear sitting there watching me. If he starts chasing me, I'm going to keep throwing the fish out of my basket until he's gorged and he won't bother me.
And what did you like to do for fun?
You go door to door, get a group of kids, and you play lots of games, hide and seek, just going out to the field and playing baseball.
And we build these massive forts, the kind that you can actually sit in and play in, with our friends, and it was just really wonderful.
So what do you like to do for fun?
Video games, definitely.
I like to go on my phone,
text, some email.
My favorite thing to do in the world is definitely watching videos and playing video games. Those take up so much of my time.
3 hours or 3 to 4 hours a day. Same.
5 hours straight.
Just last week, I watched 23 episodes of a TV series in less than 4 days.
I forget. I'm in a house, I have parents, I have a sister, I have a dog, I just think I'm in the video game, I completely get lost. I would die if I don't have my tablet.
Whenever I feel upset, I'd play video games and I'd feel normal. It's really wonderful.
When your daughters grow up, your great-great-grandkids, what do you think will happen if this trend continues?
It's scary to think that they'll never have to leave the house.
Cindy grew up doing a lot of the things that I did and enjoyed, and I see what my grandsons are doing today, and it's mind-boggling.
By the time they have kids, it's going to be a really different environment.
I actually feel a little sad because I feel like he's missing out on what's out there in the beautiful world.
Special connection with nature. I think it's innate in all children, but needs to be nurtured.
All right, now how to escape. All right, now I've got myself into a place where I can't get out. Maybe, all right, here I am. All right, so like I said, I found that today and I thought this is so appropriate, and it It's so emotional. It's also a sponsored video, but I think that there's such a strong message there that I just thought it would be good to play. So today I'm going to talk about digital age and your child. You saw a little bit about screen time, and there's a lot of different ways that kids can have screen time. Televisions, computers and tablets, those smartphones, and on all of those they're playing games, they're playing apps, they have social media, and they're going to websites. And Jason talked a lot about that. I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the other things that parents encounter. How much screen time do kids have every day? And I am not here to tell you how much your kids should have, but there are, at least I know that my children limit for their children. So I know that parents are limiting the amount of screen time that kids are playing on their tablets, on their smartphones, on grandma's smartphone even. And so those are the things that we need to be aware of. And we also need to talk to them about digital privacy. I'm going to cover some of those things tonight. What apps are popular for the older kids, even for younger kids, but older kids, they're the ones that have the apps in their back pocket, and they're the ones that are playing on the smartphones. How do we monitor technology, and how do we build that trust between parents and children? And then how do we stay ahead of it? I think that is the eternal question that every parent has. How do I stay ahead of what's happening to my children? And technology is just another channel, another environment that we have to learn about, we have to educate ourselves about, and we have to talk to our kids about. These are some of the sites that, as adults, we're very familiar with. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, LinkedIn, some of the other social platforms that we may not be using, but our teens are, or our preteens. House Party, Fam, Musical.ly, Bitmoji, YouTube, Netflix, Pandora. So there are lots of different social media apps and websites out there that we are familiar with. There are, when I put this together, there are so many more that we are not aware of. This is page one. This is not all of them. This is just page one of some of the sites, and Jason talked about that as well, that are websites that teens and children and adults are on constantly. And I have to admit, I am not familiar with most of these. How many of you are familiar with a majority of them? Yeah, I know. Isn't it amazing? It is just a wild west out there. Okay, next slide. More sites that you may not be aware of. I'm going to talk about two of these that are on here, but there are so many more that parents need to educate themselves about, that we need to understand which ones are our kids going to and which ones are they using and how are they using them. So I'm going to talk tonight about two of these, but all of these have interesting features that we need to be aware of. The first one is a calculator. So you know about this one. So you go to you have a calculator on your smartphone, and it works like a real calculator. You can use it on your kid's phone. It's a real calculator, but you put a code into it, a password into it, and it goes into a hidden area with videos and images and messages or other apps that are hidden away that we don't see because there's a layer of security between them and us. So inside a calculator, smart hide calculator, not a good thing. The other one is Yik Yak, and I've heard of this one, and you may have heard of it as well. It's a social forum that is geographically centered, and high school and middle school students use it to cyberbully. And do you see this one a lot? Yeah. So this is another one that it's not a good place to be for our kids. And so Yik Yak, how cute is that little guy? You know, you see him on the phone and you don't know how nasty it is. So those are the only two I'm going to highlight, but there are so many out there, and And as Jason said, more apps developed every day. And it's really hard to get your arms around all of them, so you just have to, it's a never-ending process to educate. So, how to monitor your child's internet usage? The best way to do it is check their browser history. At least that's the first step. Check their browser history. There are ways on all the browsers. Internet Explorer has tools. Chrome has history. There are lots of different browsers out there, and they all have a browser history. Something to remember. If there's not a browser history on there, they've cleared it. And that's also a big red flag. So there should be a browser history, and you should be able to find it, and it should go back for, gosh, as long as you want to go back into it. And if they've cleared their browser history, then you need to talk to them about that too. I'll talk about that in another slide. So how to monitor, again, it's a chronological order, and it's from the newest one is at the top generally, and then it just reverse scrolls. So you can go all the way down a day, a week, a month, however long you want to go back. And if your children or your child resents you looking at his or her browser history, that's something to talk to them about too, because that is one of the rules of the road I'm going to talk about in just a minute or two. While I was putting this together at work, I was visiting with one of my coworkers, and she has 2 preteens, and she was wondering how much screen time they were using. And so she put an app on that links her phone to their phones, and I think it was called VPN. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. So she could see how many hours or how many minutes of screen time, because they were way underestimating how much time they were using their phones. So she was able to say, you know what, you were on here 2.5 hours between the time you got off school and I got home. Oh, you're kidding, Mom. I didn't realize. So, and again, that's another way to monitor. So as Jason said, there are lots of different apps and a lot of different tools out there that parents can use so that they're aware of what's going on. Here are 3 software programs that you can use to help monitor as well. SafetyWeb.com. It monitors social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter and other ones, and it deletes explicit content it detects explicit content in your child's messages, and it will send you an alert. Social Shield. It's a paid service that checks your child's friends against a variety of databases and alerts you if there's a chance that that person that's in contact with your child is not who they say they are. And McGruff. Who doesn't remember McGruff? So McGruff Safeguard allows you to remotely monitor online conversations, search terms and sites visited. It gathers a huge amount of information and presents it in an easy-to-understand way. I didn't include all the information about all of these, but the McGruff one was interesting because it also decoded some of those words that kids use that we don't understand the real meanings for. And so it has a dictionary in it, which is really cool. So, now we're going to talk about rules of the road, if you will. Teach internet safety. Teach your kids not to give out, just like we told them don't talk to strangers. Teach them to not give out phone numbers or personal schedules or email addresses or locations to people when they're online. Have them talk to you about when they are meetings, when they've met someone online. That's pretty scary, but you want to keep those lines of communication open. Teach them to be skeptical of emails or communications from unknown sources. Today we get so much spam. Our kids are getting it on their phones, on their smartphones, and on their laptops as well. Teach them not to give out online passwords to people they know, not just people they don't know, but to people that they know. Passwords, the only one who should know the password besides them is you. And don't download software or programs without checking. So there should be a standard rule that there's nothing downloaded until you've given an okay on it. One of the things that Jamie Nold talked about earlier tonight before we set up was that he is the keeper of all the account passwords for his kids' phones and their social media and their other laptops. So that is really the first rule that you need to maintain, that no one should have private email or social media accounts. Parents know all the passwords all the time. Install internet accountability and filtering on all the devices, and that will block inadvertent exposure, hopefully, to inappropriate material online. Use Safe Search on all web browsers, and you can go into your web browsers and you can find out what those Safe Search parameters are, so that while they're not foolproof, it is just one more layer of protection that you can put on your browsing for your kids. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about homework. There are so many things that are happening out there that we have to be aware of, and as parents, we have to do our homework too. So we need to keep aware of what's going on out there. We also need to have that line of communication open with our kids. And as a mother of former teenagers, I know that's a really hard thing to do, but it has to happen. Ask them what sites they're using. Be engaged with them. Find out what video games are they playing. At some point, they get to an age where they go out and buy their own video games or download them. And so we need to understand what they're playing, what they're doing, what apps they're using. And then we need to research those apps to make sure that they are appropriate. If there are dangerous functions and features, you're going to be able to find those on some of the websites that Jason talked about that are going to give you the red flags on things that they're using or that the children are using. And as important as being the keeper of all the passwords, coach without condemning. You need to make sure that you're not shaming them, you're not condemning what they're doing, but that you're engaged with what they're doing and that they understand that you're doing it because you love them. Finally, get real with your kids about what happens, about the dangers of being online. Kids don't understand that whole wild world that the internet is. Explain about social networking profiles that people use that are fake so that they can talk to kids. Explain about profiling that's done by adults and other teens to lure children and youngsters in. Talk about GPS locators that can be hacked so that people can find out where you are. And talk to them, frankly, about sexting and lewd photographs, because they are forever. Once they're out there, they're there forever. And that's it. Exit. You know, is it back here?
I suppose you did.
Oh, yes. And then you're the other one.
Okay, this is overwhelming. How many were here last week? Ooh, good. How many were born between 1980 and 2002? 3, 4. You are millennials. I teach a class at the University of Minnesota or University of South Dakota. And one of the things I'm trying to do, it's called human relations, and what we try to do is make a bridge between different cultures, okay? And one unit I do is on millennials and how to understand the baby boomers and Generation X. And there's a big difference between them and us. But if you were here last week, I also told you I like to start with humor, and I'm going to try and get this up for a little bit of humor. It's not here. That happens. Now I probably lost and now I lost everything. Oof. Okay, I'll go. I won't go with humor. Maybe during the break I can pull it up. So what Nicole didn't tell you is that my class at the university was over last week, and I got a call on Friday that, would you come back to work full-time as a middle school counselor? So that's what I'm doing. So I am going to be a middle school counselor the rest of the year for a counselor at Memorial who had a baby. So what do you think one of the first things that, one of the first cases I had to deal with? A girl sending a nude picture to a friend who is male, and the male sending it back, his picture back. I hope you will often thank your school counselor for all the things that they go through to help protect our kids and to work with our kids. One of the things that So one of the things I do with my class at the university is we talk about communication. And I'm going to have you help me with this. What is one way that we communicate? The words we use. Yep. What's another one? Body language. And what's the third one? Action. The tone of voice. Those are three ways that we communicate. I'm communicating to you right now through my body language, my words, and my tone of voice, right? So which of these three do you think is the most important way that we communicate? Words or the body language, or is it the tone of voice I'm using? Both? All three? There's one that stands out. 7% of what we communicate is through the words that I'm using. The tone of voice, 38%. So obviously, body language. 55% of how we communicate is through our body language. Now you and I, because there's only a few of you that were born between 1980 and 2002, the rest of us probably have developed some skills in reading body language just because we're so old. And because we haven't had a cell phone. One of the big things that I try to communicate with my kids in my class is the fact that I grew up without a cell phone. And then I showed them a slide, a series of slides of kids, of teenagers. One slide shows four of them in a museum, and they're all on their cell phones, not looking at what's on the walls of the museum. I show a slide of two best friends out forever, or two best friends forever, and of course they're talking on their they're looking at their cell phones. I show a slide of kids at a football game, and they're all on their phones, not looking at the game. So I showed these slides to my class, and they say, well, what's new? They are so used to that. But those of us, well, then the last slide is a quote by Einstein, and it says, when technology takes over, we're going to raise a bunch of idiots. And that's his words. And so again, I show that to my students, and I try to get some reaction, but they think that's their life. So what I have to do, and what people, maybe some of you have to do, is to adapt to this new life. We've been hearing a lot of good information tonight about how we can do that. But this is difficult for me because I did not grow up with all this tech stuff. But I have to try to understand our kids today and their new life that I'm not used to, and maybe some of you are not used to. Okay, which ones are missing in today's way that we communicate? When kids communicate through texting or through emails, they can't hear a tone of voice. When they communicate through a cell phone, iPads, whatever, they cannot read body language. I put up here a third one because the third thing they're missing is touch. So when our kids are using our cell phones and all the time, they're missing communication by tone of voice, body language, and touch. But then kids say, I'm so well connected. I got so many friends, on my phone or whatever. I don't know if you know anything about the book Blue Zones, in which they have researched there are certain places on our planet where people live to be 100 years or older, and it's pretty normal. And one of the huge factors is having a social network of people that you can touch and that you can read their body language and you can understand their tone of voice. And that's what's troubling to me, is the fact that our kids are losing this, and these are the things that I grew up with. And so what kind of kids are we going to have? They're going to be okay, because they're going to adapt to this. They are adapting to it. And we have to learn to understand where they're at. And that's kind of hard for some of us who are a little bit older. Also, good mental health, as I said, means that a lot of us are socially connected. We have groups of friends, we can see them, touch them, and so forth. And our kids say, well, I'm so connected. I have all these friends, Mr. Haig. They're on my cell phone. I text them. Then why is depression with kids right now at such a high level? And why are the suicide rates not coming down if kids are so well connected? So our cell phones are not addressing some of those things. We think our kids are so well connected because maybe they have 50 people on Facebook, whatever they're using. But they're not getting some of the things that, to me, mean good mental health. So how do we as parents and as adults communicate more effectively? Number one is to listen actively. Not terribly profound. Listen and look for feelings, connect the feelings to content, and suggest alternatives. I spend a whole hour on this kind of stuff in my parenting session, so I just wanted you to see the slide. And then I'm going to leave you with the tip here, because I cannot imagine handing a cell phone to a kid without a contract. And for those of you here last week, I talked about a contract if you're going to hand your kids the keys to the car. I think a contract for a kid using a cell phone is equally as important. So I have one up here that I like, the cell phone contract for teens. There's some things in this one I don't like, but basically it's kind of a good contract. When you write a contract for kids, and I'm not saying that you have to use this one. If you go on, if you Google this, you'll find all kinds of them. But at the bottom, this also has some parent expectations. Number one, I will respect my child's privacy when he or she is talking or texting. Number two, important one, if I have a concern, I have the right to read text messages or review call logs without telling my child first. Important to tell your kid that you will check. Don't just do it in secret, but tell him ahead or her ahead of time that if you suspect anything, you as a parent have the right to do some research on what's going on. I will pay the standard monthly fee for the cell phone. Why is that important? Because I've had some parents make the kid pay the fee. But if the kid pays the fee, he feels or she has ownership. You can't tell me I can't do that because I own it. So it's important for you maybe to do the monthly fee, but if they have extra charges on it through something other than emails or whatever they're doing, then they have to pay for it. What I would do on a contract like this is have the kid initial each one that he or she has read it. And I would not surprise the kid with the contract and says, here's the contract we're going to use. Give it to the kid, have the kid read it, say, okay, we're going to talk about this tomorrow or the next day, and I want your input. How powerful it is for a kid to know that his parent wants his or her input into this contract. And then you come into this thing about negotiating and how important it is to negotiate with the teenager so he or she feels they have some power. One of the 5 goals of a teenager is to have power. And how they get it is the problem. And as a parent, you have to help your kids get this power. And then you go over this contract and you review it maybe every month and this kind of thing. It's so important, as I said last week, to put things in writing because a teenager is going to come back and haunt you all the time with, well, I didn't know that, but that's what that meant, or I didn't understand that. If it's in writing, paste it on the refrigerator or have it someplace where it's accessible, where you and the kid can see it once in a while. It really helps to have things in writing, especially the big life and death issues. Not if they're going to do their chores, but big life and death issues, the contract is so important. I would also like to, besides a contract, is all of us can work to put what I call humanness back into our lives. I've had parents tell me some things that they're doing, and I'm sure many of you in here are doing some good things too. One parent says that all the cell phones during dinner, if they're still eating dinner together, are put in the middle of the table and nobody can use them for the whole dinner. I think you have seen, and I have seen, some very poor modeling going on with our use of cell phones. I have a friend who every time I get in the car with him and we start driving, he's got a cell phone call, and he answers it. Makes me feel not so good, as if I'm not that important. We do that as adults. A phone call comes in, and we're with our kids in the car, and we'll answer the phone. So what we do as parents and as adults is so important that we model appropriate behavior in our use of technology. And so I could go on and on about examples of humanness. In fact, I had parents last week, I had a set of parents, they have 2 kids in middle school, and they do not have cell phones. I says, how do you do that? Well, that's our rule. They're not going to have a cell phone until they're 16. I says, well, don't your kids then go off and use a friend's cell phone, which is a problem? And sometimes, yeah, they do. So having a cell phone or an iPad or whatever is a huge responsibility. And these people behind me have given you some of the information that you need to have the informational talk with your kid about some of this stuff. But then please put a guy or a kid on a contract. It makes life a little bit easier for parents. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll ask you to write some questions down that you have, and then you can turn them in to Anita, Michelle, or myself in the back. We'll take about 2 to 3 minute break and come back for question and answer time so that we have plenty of time to do that. So, okay?
All right. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sure it will be. I just, when I do, yeah, thank you very much. When I do these.
get started with our question and answer time. So I'm just going to read questions that you guys wrote, and anyone in the panel can answer, or if it's directed more at one person than the other. But the first question is, what is an ideal age for a child to own a phone?
Never.
I second that.
I think a lot has to do with your kids and how he or she can handle responsibility. Some kids shouldn't have a cell phone till they're older because they're not very responsible people. So that's, I think, is a situational thing according to your kid. Some kids at a very young age can be very responsible and maybe handle it. Maybe they can't.
I usually stick with never, regardless. This makes more work for me. I think, I like 16. I think that's a little bit closer, and a lot of people are going to think that's unrealistic. But again, I think that as technology continues to evolve, we continue to get suckered into believing it's the only way, and it isn't, because for thousands of years, people lived without this. So, yeah, it really is going to come down to what their maturity level is, but I don't know. There's not really a good answer for that. It's all going to be dependent on the child.
Okay, thank you. So kind of along with that question is, what do you consider a safe amount of screen time? In your opinion?
Well, I guess oftentimes I will try to set rules. I love that contract, by the way, too. You'll see law enforcement do that on scene even sometimes when we're talking with parents and kids. But I think that definitely not during any type of family function such as meals or anything else. And then we oftentimes I recommend 8 o'clock. Phone goes into parents' possession, because when I'm seeing nudes being sent, it's not at 5 p.m. and it's typically not at 10 a.m. It's in the wee hours. So nothing good happens after dark when it comes to those phones. There's no reason for them to have them, especially when they're in the safety of their own home. So I would definitely set hours in which those can be used. There are apps that can control when that usage can occur, but there is workarounds for everything. So it's very hard to use your phone when it's in dad's gun safe. I'll put it that way. 8 o'clock is typically the time that I always set.
That can also be in your contract. One thing I forgot to say in the contract, and I didn't have time to read each of those elements, but you have to be very detailed. You can't make a general statement, because kids will misinterpret that or define it in their own way. So if you're going to have consequences, spell out what those consequences are in detail so that the kid knows. Otherwise, they're going to make up their own rules.
The only thing I would say is that I think there needs to be a balance between screen time and all of the other things that are out there in the world, reading and nature walks and being with the family and doing all of those things that are not screen time. So there needs to be a balance so that they're aware of other activities that they should be doing to fill up their lives.
Thank you. How do you figure out what the new apps are, and is there a place to find them?
I typically figure them out when I get a case that comes across my desk that has an app that I've never heard before, and I have to research it. So it's unfortunately the way it is. With the caseload we have, we don't have a lot of time for some of that preemptive research. Would be nice if we did. But a lot of times it comes from that. Sometimes I'll get it from school resource officers too, who are noticing a trend. They're seeing something. They call and ask me about it. If it's something I know about, we'll talk. If not, then I'll have to try to figure that out. But unfortunately, I don't use a lot of these apps myself, but I have to become familiar with them when the time comes.
I would think there are probably some parenting sites that would be resources for that. And I don't have any of those URLs, but those are the places where parents and educators are going to share that information.
We will make copies of their slides that they put up there available to you. So you can get those off there, the ones that they had up there. Okay. Oh,
I just was going to add, with my kids, I have an iPhone, they have Apple, so it sends me a request before they can download the app. Whether it's free or have to be paid for, and that way the app I allow them to put them on.
did everyone hear that comment? With the iPhones, if their child wants to download an app, they have a request sent to the parent to approve of that. That might be one other way. So. Okay. So there's options for Google products with that too. Okay.
If you don't have an iPhone, there's something called Disney Circle. It is a $100 one-time investment, but we have 3 kids and they share a flip phone, and it's still amazing what they see to our house. So it will alert us every time the device is turned on, and the kids will be monitoring every Xbox stuff, Androids, DS's, everything, everybody can be individualized, you can set timers on it. It makes it effortless to do our job. I mean, it is so much easier. Chromebooks, when you're running home from school, you can put those on it. So I do, like Disney Circle, if you look at their commercial alone, you'll go, oh my gosh, this is my house. So that will help with Androids too, and it will help with all of them. If you've left it for teenagers, you can rent in the house, because it will say you have a new device. And then we're going, so it works in the summertime if you've got teenagers, and we told our kids we're monitoring you, but we never told them that we're monitoring them, as far as we didn't want them to know that we could see them.
And it's called Disney?
Disney Circle.
Disney Circle.
Ever heard of it?
No, that's good.
It's free, and after that, and then I think there's $10 more a month. It's for extra storage, and if you want to monitor it outside of your network. If you want to monitor their phone on a school network, a friend's network, anything like that, for $10 extra. So otherwise, $100 off anything off of your Wi-Fi. And then him and I could set it up for ours, and we're not monitoring. We don't have filters. You don't have to worry, well, what's on my stuff, but every single thing is. So it has been awesome.
Interesting.
If you're using data, my kids haven't figured that out yet. We've had it for a while. So they have not figured out. They will get to a point where they'll tell their girlfriend, boyfriend, hey, shut yours off and things like that. But that's just the perk of it. It was never meant to catch. Yeah, then it wouldn't be much. And I don't know with that $10 extra, if there might be something else with that. If you have anything on your internet.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Can you see what your child has sent on Snapchat? Pictures, conversations after they have been sent. If so, how far back can you go and how do you do it?
It depends on what part of Snapchat they're using. If they're simply sending snaps out, you can definitely set the app up to where they disappear along with the photo disappearing for the recipient after a certain amount of time. But if you're ever in that application and you swipe to the right, you'll see what looks like a text thread would for just on your regular texting app that you have on your phone. And oftentimes they will communicate through text and through images in that thread instead of just simply sending snaps out. When it comes to an actual conversation they want to hold, it's difficult to hold those conversations with just snaps, which is just an image and then you can add text to the image. So they'll switch over to the texting portion of that application, and that's we can find that material. And it'd be a good time to note this. Kids often think that because they use Snapchat that people won't be able to keep those images. You can screenshot Snapchat images. It does alert the sender that screenshot has been made. However, it's not going to stop anybody from using another device to take a picture of the screen to keep that image as well. So Snapchat is not as anonymous as they think.
What is the fine or punishment for a juvenile sending naked sexting photos?
We tend to divert almost every crime that any juvenile commits. So you won't see them go to JDC. You typically won't see them get fined. And if they do end up in front of a judge, more than likely what you'll see is some type of probation. And that's usually the extent of it. The system is not set up for punishing juveniles any longer, so it's really going to fall on parents' shoulders in order to take care of that, because we are not seeing much happen with convictions when it comes to that, if we attempt prosecution, which is not always the case.
Maybe kind of off of that question, could you tell us what you are seeing as far as this topic goes within the middle schools, even elementary schools? What are the most common, I guess, consequences of social media issues that are coming up as far as law enforcement goes?
As far as...
Understand my question? Well, I think like last week, it was very eye-opening that, some of the issues we're seeing with drug and alcohol use is actually happening in middle school and elementary school at this point. And so some of us were, surprised to hear some of those things. As far as social media goes, what are you seeing these days that as parents we need to be concerned about in the younger years?
I think 8 is probably my youngest as far as the exchange of nudes goes, although that's not common. I've had a couple 10-year-olds, but oftentimes it is middle school when we start to see these type of things start. Most of the time it is somewhere around when puberty begins, because then that curiosity begins, and that's when these type of things happen. I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but...
Somewhat. There's another question here, like cyberbullying, or what are a lot of these consequences? We talked about sexting, but we haven't talked about cyberbullying, or we obviously don't want our children to be on these sites because we've talked about predators also. Mm-hmm. But are there other issues that maybe we haven't addressed yet that you're seeing?
Well, from my perspective, remember I showed you the slide about body language and about the tone of voice? And oftentimes, especially girls, they get these texts or an email, and they cannot read the body language or the tone of voice, and they misinterpret everything that's being said. And that's where the counselors come in, because then we have to try to work it out. We may have to call the person in, if we know who was the texter, and say, what did you really mean? Because girls, especially girls, get to all this drama, and I had one today, because she misinterpreted what was said to her through a text. And they get all, they really get upset when these girls can't understand why their friends said this to them, when it may have been a joke. And now we have to use abbreviations in our texting so that we can relate to the other person our emotions at the time. LOL. It's supposed to be a joke. I used to think LOL when I first got into this meant lots of love, and I thought, man, I'm getting lots of love. But it means lots of laughs. So now our kids are coming up with all these abbreviations to try to tell the other person their emotions. But it's not working very well. Mm. So one of the things that, as I said, that we have to do a lot of in middle schools is interpret what the other person said. And another issue, and it's completely unrelated, but I dealt with it today, it's about talk about it a minute. We have a lot of families right now, as you probably know, that are divorced or separated. And we have kids going back and forth between one to the other parent. And if the parents are not getting along, the ex-spouses are not getting along, what happens so often is one parent will buy the phone, and the other parent, when the kid comes to live with the other parent for a while, has no control. And so she or he, when for instance, maybe he's or she's living with mother, and mother didn't buy the phone, the kid says, well, it's mine. My dad bought it for me. And that is happening a lot lately, is that if the spouses, ex-spouses, are not talking and not have the same language or the same whatever, the kids are going to manipulate those parents back and forth. And that is becoming a big issue with those of us who are counseling in middle school.
Okay, so then back to the cyberbullying. Do you have suggestions if your child is being cyberbullied?
Well, those things are handled again on a situational basis. And we would hope that those kids would report it, because they can now report it through the website or online to us in the school. And so I get a whole page of, for instance, of a bullying that's supposedly going on with these kids, and the kid who is reporting it is supposed to tell me what's going on. And then we can take it from there. Yes, it is happening, but we have, I think, a pretty good program in our schools to try to deal with it. If it goes on at home, we can't deal with it there. But at school, these kids come to us, either online or in person, tell us what's going on, and we try then to handle it on a situational basis, mostly through our administrators, because that's a bullying issue, and that can't be tolerated.
So when something like that happens, let's say at the middle school, do the parents then find out about it?
That's a good question. I don't know what the administrators would do. I don't have to report that as a counselor, because mostly that's confidential, but the administrators don't have to hold everything confidentially. So they would, if I think, if it's that serious, yeah. The school system here in Sioux Falls has a.
Oh.
She wanted to know if the school has anything that we can do with the cyberbully, right? And there is a pretty set series of things that our administrators do or can do. So I can't say that every kid is handled the same way. It all depends how serious the cyberbullying might be, or the bullying might be, and how often it is. So I can't put a blanket answer on that, because it all depends upon the degree of bullying and how many times. If you define bullying, it has to be done repeatedly. Now, I have 2 online kids that I have to see, but it only happened once. You know, this one said, kids, well, my friend stepped on my backpack and got it wet. Well, it happened once in the whole year, so that's not bullying, but he enters it as a bullying example. So then we have to sort of interpret what some of these things are all about. And if it's a bullying thing, the administrators would let you know.
Okay, when using apps like Musical.ly, is that how you pronounce that one? Okay. Is there really a privacy setting? And is it safe if you only share with people you invite or approve of?
I guess I haven't really worked Musical.ly before. The only times I run into it is when I'm doing exams on young ladies' phones, and those videos are everywhere, but I couldn't tell you as far as any of the settings or anything as far as how that works.
Maybe help with a little bit of that. There is, yes, on Musical.ly, you can make it. Musical.ly is, I'm too loud, please tell me.
Musical.ly is an app where the kids will videotape themselves lip syncing to a song as if they're creating the music video.
But it doesn't do a whole song, it just does a little portion of it, maybe like 10, 15 seconds of it. So some kids don't understand the severity of that entire song because some of those words that they're lip syncing to may not be as harmful as the rest of the song. You can share those videos that you do with just friends, but there's also a privacy setting on there, so your children can record maybe something that isn't as appropriate and save it on their phone, but no one has access to it. But from our knowledge and our experience with it, it's just our children had it, and we see what other children are doing, perhaps our own, and we just, Musical.ly is no more. So it's, I mean, some kids use it innocently, but it just takes that one person that is a friend of yours. But you don't have to be friends with people to see other people's, those people that want to lure you to lip sync to these other songs that are very inappropriate. Even though you're not saying it, you're still lip syncing to them.
Would that be a concern with other apps? I couldn't name one, but like your kids would say, well, I'm only going to invite people I know, or that type of thing. Is that a legitimate reasoning for us as parents to say, well, then it's safe?
No.
I guess?
No, and it won't be. And a lot of times what we will see, I'll give an example of a case. I had a middle school case where there was nudes of two different boys that were being spread around this group, and this was on Facebook Messenger. And they were all friends, and they were all members of this group, and they all knew each other, with the exception of one person who was the girlfriend, and I'll quote, end of quote, of a couple of these boys, although all the boys didn't realize that this girl was the girlfriend to others. That girlfriend was a male in Florida and had used stock photos online, and the boys were essentially fighting over this person online. And I think this person who was catfishing said they went to one of the other middle schools in town, and that was literally all it took for them to invite friends. So we see a lot of these young folks are friends with more people that they actually haven't had physical contact with online than people that they actually have. And most of the times when I'm talking with people in these cases, they refer to them as boyfriend or girlfriend. Well, when was the last time you saw them? Well, I've never seen them. They don't ever meet these people in person. And if you go through their friends list, it's more people that they haven't met in person than people they actually have. So just making you can make your page as private as you want, but it will still come down to who the child allows into that circle and to have access to their things, and they usually aren't too cautious about that, from my experience anyway.
Okay. When you don't currently have rules, such as time limits or monitoring rules, how do you go backwards with a teen to enforce them without making them resent you or question your trust in them?
Well, I think you can tell them that you learned some things tonight. And say, hey, I heard about this contract. And then spell out some of those things. And I said, don't say, this is how we're going to do it. Give the kid a chance to negotiate. Give it to him or her and say, what do you think? Are these things going to be okay? And if they're not, that's a good way to start a conversation. That's a good way to have the talk. is to have them feeling that they have some input into that contract. And so you can bring up some of those things then that you just mentioned in that question. I think now it's ready for a contract between you and me.
Okay, this is a good question too. Loss of screen time is a common consequence for breaking rules in our household. We've noticed teens with withdrawal symptoms from their tech addiction. Do you have any advice? Guess we're dealing with.
Well, that sort of sounds like that kid has depression. Any kid that withdraws a whole lot, either from you or from his or her technology, probably has some depressive things that we need to talk about. Withdrawal is a good symptom of depression, especially if it's excessive. So I think that's could be a red flag.
I think the question was that when the technology is taken away, they go through withdrawal, like they're at.
That's different. Yeah. They do, yes. That's what happens when we're addicted to something. And I don't have an answer for that one. I had a girl in today, and her cell phone was taken away from her, but there's no contract, and she doesn't know when she's going to get it back, and she's really angry because there's no time limit. It hasn't been spelled out to her. And if she had been on a contract, so it was expressly put in there or written in there what the consequence is. But let me also tell you about a consequence. And this was brought up last Thursday, so maybe you still remember the PA that we had here, the physician's assistant, said that the brain in a kid is not developed, the prefrontal cortex is not developed until you're about 23 or 24, 25. In some of us, it never develops, but the prefrontal cortex has to do with impulse control. So sometimes kids and adolescents are very impulsive, and sometimes that's beyond their control because the brain isn't developed yet. The other important thing that brain does, or that part of the brain, is to give the kids some abstract thinking about the future. Kids cannot think very well about the future. So if we say, for instance, well, if you put a picture on whatever, it's going to show up. It might show up in 5 years down the road. And then what's going to happen? Well, that kind of a threat probably doesn't mean much to a kid because they are thinking for the present. Teenagers think for the present, for today. What's more important to them is what they have for lunch today, or if my girlfriend or boyfriend says hi to me, they're not thinking about the future. I learned that years ago when I was first teaching, and I would give these assignments that would take, 3-4 weeks down the road, you have this paper due. Well, they would all wait till the very last night, of course, because they can't think about the consequences of what's going to happen 3 or 4 weeks down the road. So if you're going to threaten your kid, don't use the time element. Just think of what's going to happen to you down the road in 5 years. You got to talk to them about what's going to happen to you today, and maybe they can understand that. Because these, for instance, these girls and guys that were spreading these pictures yesterday, they're thinking about today, not about what's going to happen 5 months from today. Because we're adults and our brain hopefully is developed in that area, we can think about the future. But that abstract thinking is a little bit difficult for kids who are teenagers.
Okay, so that was the end of the questions that were turned in to be asked tonight. So we can conclude our 2-parent education series. And I just want to especially thank our panel for coming tonight and their expertise. But I want to make sure that I thank each of you. And I hope that my goal of organizing these was that you would feel empowered as parents now to go home and to maybe do some things maybe a little differently or take some of these suggestions away, but that we would all become better parents because of this. So, yeah, do you have a comment? They will be. On K-Learn. The- Okay. And just on a side note, if this is something that you enjoyed and you felt was very helpful and you have other issues that you feel like would be beneficial to you as parenting, if you want to come and talk to me after this, that would be helpful. And this might be something that we can continue through the next school year or do them more often, that type of thing. But again, thanks for coming tonight.